Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on achieving educational equity for New York City's newcomer students. We're so glad that you were able to join us today. We have a lot of great panelists here that are going to be discussing a little bit more about some issues. You're probably well aware of all the 30,000 newcomer students who have arrived to New York City since April 2022. And today we're going to be talking about the strengths, assets, and challenges facing New York City's newest students. We're going to be talking a little bit about collaborative approaches that schools, community-based organizations, and policymakers can take to address these issues. My name is Natasha Quiroga. I am Director of Education Policy and InsideSchools at the New Schools Center for New York City Affairs, and I will be your moderator today. We have a great group of expert panelists that are joining us today. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming. Today we have Lara Evangelista, Executive Director of InsideSchools Network, Ivan Mora, a teacher at International Community High School, Melissa De Leon, principal of the International High School at Lafayette in Brooklyn, Dr. Lisa Oslander, principal investigator and senior project director of Bridges to Academic Success, Maria Rocha Carrillo, New York City program specialist at InsideSchools, Catalina Cruz, assemblywoman for New York State Assembly District 39, Alejandra Vasquez Bauer, fellow at the Century Foundation and co-founder of the National Newcomer Network, and Aktas Shanori, who is an 11th grader at Eleanor Roosevelt High School. And so that's who's going to be speaking today. We'd love to hear from you. If you can type in the chat and send us a message to let us know what your role is, what grade level you work with that applies to you, and where you're tuning in from, which borough, New York City, New York State, or even from outside of the state across the country. So while everybody shares a little in the chat, if just some quick logistics. So this webinar will be recorded and shared with all participants. We will have time at the end for Q&A. So please enter your questions in the Q&A box. And InsideSchools is also live tweeting the event, so you can follow along and add your thoughts as well. Let's just take a quick look at the chat, but feel free to share a little bit more. You can send us a chat message. I think it's enabled to send it to the hosts and the panelists. We'll be compiling your responses and we'll share that in the follow-up email with the recording of the webinar. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Lara is going to set the framework for our discussion, for today's discussion. So Lara, if you want to jump in.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our virtual panel discussion. I'm Lara Evangelista, Executive Director of the InsideSchools Network. We're an education nonprofit that partners with schools and districts to better serve their newcomer students. I'm really excited to welcome you to today's conversation on this topic of really great importance, the educational experience of New York City's newest students. So as many of you are aware, our city has welcomed over 30,000 newcomers into its public schools, and each of them arrive with a unique background, story, and set of experiences. These are the students that I've had the privilege of working with throughout my career. Many of the media reports, though, have focused on some of the challenges these students face: housing, mental health, education. And more specifically, one challenge that has been highlighted again and again in education has been on SLIFE students, which stands for students with limited or interrupted formal education. This term encompasses students who have experienced disruptions or gaps in their learning due to various reasons, such as migration, resettlement, or other life circumstances. And these students are 2 or more years below grade level in reading and math. As we begin this conversation, I wanted to just take a minute to just make sure we understood that definition, and also to keep in mind that SLIFE students and newcomers are not made up of homogeneous groups of students. They are, in fact, made up of an incredibly heterogeneous group of students with very unique perspectives, rich cultural backgrounds, and the resilience that comes from navigating diverse experiences. So rather than viewing these interruptions and challenges solely as deficits, our discussion today will center on an asset-based perspective and recognize the strengths and untapped potentials these students and all of our newcomers bring to our educational landscape. So we're going to get into some critical questions like, who are these students that now form such an important part of our school communities? What conditions can be created to foster their success in our city? And most importantly, how can we, educators, community organizations, and policymakers collaborate effectively to support these students and their families during this transition phase? So we're really fortunate to have a panel of experts who understand the importance of embracing an asset-based approach when working with these young people. So I'm really excited to get into the conversation so that we can explore ways that we can collectively empower these newest New Yorkers. I'll pass it back to you, Natasha.
Thank you so much, Lada. So that's helpful to set the framework for today's, the context for today's discussion. So let's start off with Ivan Mora, who is a teacher in one of our high schools in New York City. So Ivan, what are some of the assets that your newcomer students bring, and how do you build on them in the classroom?
They bring so many assets, and it's difficult for a teacher who doesn't know how to look for these things to actually come across them, because we try to see students as equals. We try to see students with traditional learning, and I know that every time that I talk to a student who's new to the US, I say to them, you have so much to bring to the table, regardless of your experience, regardless of any negative experience that you've had. It's so many assets. I can give you some examples. I had a student, Nafin, who only entered the first grade for about 6 months, so he barely knew how to read and write. But this child knew exactly how to build and take apart a motorcycle. And there was such joy by giving the opportunity for him to bring this to the table. And that's sort of how I approach all my students. They always come with something. And it's something that I say to them, I never knew how to do this when I was a teenager. So they are definitely special in that way.
That's great. So what do you do with your newcomer students and your students who have interrupted or limited formal education?
Well, the key is identifying those students first. So thankfully, I've been around long enough where I've been able to contribute to the systems and structures at my school that allows us to identify these students almost immediately upon enrollment. This really limits the time that we have to figure out where the gaps exist. And so by doing this, we have two very specific targets that we use, or tools that we use to be able to identify any gaps. One of them is the MLS, the multilingual screener, which I'm sure Dr. Lisa will go into a little bit more in depth. But this screener is vital because it allows us to see where the student is within their native language reading comprehension. And you know, it's all over the research about second language acquisition that students who have a very low literacy level in their native language, it becomes very challenging for them to become literate in the second language. So that's one thing that we do. The other thing that we do is that we, as a school, compiled a asset-based questionnaire, which is completely the opposite of what we used to administer back like 10 years ago, when we were like, well, what are the gaps? Let's focus on the gaps. Let's focus on the gaps. We turned that around and we said, let's focus on what the students bring to the table. And so the questionnaire gets filled out in an interview model. Counselors complete it. Enrollment specialists, the enrollment team complete it. And so this information is dispersed to other teachers so that they know a little bit more about the students before they even enter the classroom. So this is all done upon enrollment.
That's great. So you're definitely focused on the asset-based approach that Lada was talking about. So can you share a little bit more how that fits into the nexus of support that newcomer students need?
So when we conduct these interviews, we also get a sense of their life. We get a sense of what their journey has looked like. We get a sense of any sort of supports that their family needs. I know that there's a lot of kids right now in shelters. And so we're able to better assist them with community outreach resources. We're able to also use anything that they know. Like there's a lot of kids who have had to work to be able to come here. And they bring a set of skills to the table that we ultimately use when we are creating curriculum for them that speaks to their strengths and what they're able to do. Because it is vital, it is important to be able to talk to these kids and reach these kids and let them know that even though they're still learning English, even though they're learning a new culture, what they bring to the table can be expanded upon by the social action projects that we actually have at school and through project-based learning tasks. So it becomes very personal for the teachers, for the administrators, to really collaborate with one another to give them the opportunity to develop advocacy skills for themselves, let them know that there are issues out there that they're not alone in facing. And so sometimes this really empowers them to take action. And that's really what we want to do with these students. We want them to be active. We want them to be self-advocates. And that's what we do with our curriculum and our instruction almost across every class.
That's great. And so, we've got a lot of folks on who are from throughout New York City, New York State, and across the country who have been getting a lot of newcomer students into their schools and communities. And so some of them are asking about the interview documents you mentioned, the questionnaire. Are you able to share that information? Do you have any other words of advice for these folks?
Yeah, I can definitely share it. It's something that we created within our team, within our schools. I think that's really key. One of the things that it's almost like the same way that we treat student learning. We want to bring all the assets to the table. We want to make sure that all the strengths are being highlighted. We do the same thing where we have the same approach with teacher and adult learning. We came together and we said, well, what is something that we want to focus on to ask students that really showcases what they bring to the table, what their assets are, what their strengths are, what their experiences are? How can we use these experiences to connect with them? Because I think aside from saying, yes, we want them to show strength, we want to see their strength, we want to give them an opportunity. These students, for the most part, needs to see themselves as learners. And so when you give them the opportunity to learn and see themselves as such, then that builds their confidence. And so starting up here for like a 9th grade student and saying these are the standards, this is what we need to adhere to, is really looking at it and differentiating for where they are and meeting them where they are and bringing them up that way, because it's really I've seen it, and I've been a victim of this, or not victim, but I've been like the perpetrator myself, where as a teacher, not knowing how to treat SLIFE students, we give them something that we think, because of the grade level that they're in, that they need to know. But we don't focus on the foundational skills that they need to be able to get there. So I think patience and caring and understanding and really looking at these kids from that perspective, because kids really sense who's in their corner. And when you go to that point of saying, I want you to learn, and I know you can, and I'm going to give you proof that you can, it's transformational for them.
Thank you for sharing those perspectives and your experiences. I think that's great advice for people who are working with newcomer students. So let's shift now and see where Melissa is. So that's helpful, I think, to get a perspective of what's happening in the classroom. So let's look a little bit more about school structures and partnerships. So Melissa, you're a principal. What critical school structures can help newcomer students to be successful in schools?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I love this question. I sense that Lara and Yvonne started to answer some of this question, first by framing that newcomers are extraordinarily diverse in our school, which is a high school designed specifically for newcomers. Our students come with many intersecting assets and needs. We have students who have moved to the US having fled dangerous situations. We have students who have gaps in formal schooling or are, SIFE. We have students that have come without their parents. Sometimes it's all three intersecting realities. And in our particular school, we have 353 students from over 30 countries who speak close to 30 different languages. So I feel like that Yvonne has described a lot around one critical component, which is like the instructional model and how staff work together. In our case, one of the key structures for that work to happen to meet the instructional needs of the students is a team structure. So our teachers work in grade level teams and meet weekly to collaborate, analyze data, and make adjustments to their instruction and talk about the students' social emotional needs, also in collaboration with other staff in the school, such as guidance counselors and social workers. So the theme is collaborative all the way through, and it shows up in different structures. Another structure that's really important is just the personnel, like the hiring. What is our approach to hiring? So everything we do is culturally responsive and collaborative. We make sure that when we are recruiting and hiring new staff across different roles, that we find staff who are either speak some of the languages that our students speak or have some shared cultural experiences or specific expertise around the pedagogy or the social-emotional needs that our students bring with them. We also put a lot of energy, as Yvonne was talking about, like our intake process. Our students come from both middle schools and also arrive throughout the year. So we make sure we use asset-based surveys. We make sure we survey them about their career interests, what they want to do in the future after high school, and also the different assessments for language development and prior educational history. And all of this converges in teachers being able to make adjustments to their projects to engage the strengths of the students. So those, I think, are the most influential structures that we have in our school that make an impact so that our program can meet their needs, academically, linguistically, socio-emotionally.
Great. That's great to hear about that. Can you share a little bit how you collaborate with other sectors to support newcomer students?
So we can't do this work alone. It's very complex. It's more enriching to do it with folks who have different specialized knowledge and access to the community and the system. So we have formal partnerships and a lot of like a spectrum of like informal collaborative relationships. And those are from the nonprofit sector, for-profit sector, and also government. So in the nonprofit sector, our main partner is the Internationals Network, because the Internationals Network supports us both in building the capacity of our staff to understand the pedagogy and the asset-based approach for supporting students, and also to help us connect with other organizations that can support our families with things like social services, including, mental health, medical, legal services, and other like innovations that we can bring to our programs, like enrichment, like bringing in the arts. So they facilitate a lot of those connections, and we meet every month as a group, and we're always exposed to different organizations. Similarly, because our district is very welcoming of newcomers, like our superintendency also connects us with different organizations and encourages us to innovate. And anytime they offer programs that are aligned with supporting multilingual learners or newcomers and SIFE, we always try to proactively participate in these programs. We also work with another organization called iMentor. They are a national organization that supports us with providing mentorship and college and career support for our students. And they also connect us with for-profit organizations that generate internship opportunities and career readiness and exposure. So every relationship ends up bringing in other relationships. And over time, we're able to create a web of supports that can meet our students and their families where they are. So it is very important for us to be collaborating with all of these different folks across the spaces.
So the collaboration, I think, is something like we really do want to focus on today as well. Is there anything else to add? I mean, we talked about earlier with Yvonne, we've got a lot of folks from not just New York City, but elsewhere. What is one piece of advice you would share with other principals who are receiving a lot of newcomer students, as well as students who have limited formal education?
Well, if we think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there are many simultaneous needs at one time with any given student and their family. So I would encourage, I mean, in our own school, we actually have been expanding the work. So developmental, I feel like we're in a place like where maybe many schools might be that are trying to extend the services that they bring to the school. I mean, I would recommend surveying the students and their families and giving them like a menu of like the different categories of support that you could get from an external organization, which could be, the DOE, or it could be a nonprofit. And then use that information and then like prioritize maybe two or three, the top three needs. And then from there, try to reach out to organizations or use connections in your network. That's something that we did at the beginning of this year because there were so many needs. We didn't have the capacity to address everything at once. So we did it in stages. So I think starting with the surveying, just like we survey the students for their strengths and needs, what are the families needing? Certainly legal services are very critical because they are time bound. Many families are in different stages of possible deportation proceedings or pursuing different relief. So certainly like a partner in that work who can do free legal screenings is very welcome by the students and their families. Medical health access is also very important. Just helping families navigate the bureaucracy. So bringing in other organizations that sort of know how to break down, those processes and make them understandable and just sit with someone and, help them apply for a benefit is something that really helps. So I would say that's how I would start or expand the work to help all of these new amazing families that are here.
Great. That's fantastic. I think this is definitely useful advice for folks on this webinar. And I think Yvonne had one thing to add as well.
So it's funny because when I started teaching, I didn't know anything about psych students. I had no idea how to support them. I was in the dark, and really it's inquiring, making constant inquiry. I think, Melissa, you mentioned cycles of improvement, and that's something that we really focus on at school because we are constantly asking questions about how to best support our students, and in conducting these cycles of inquiry, we are also learning, like as adults, we're learning from one another. And I think one thing that really stuck to me, that my principal gave me a lot of support on, is that we don't have to have all the right answers, because honestly, when you're dealing with human beings as complex as we are, we don't always have the right answers. Doctors don't always have the right answers. So I think it's really important for teacher leaders and teachers themselves to give themselves grace, and really look to each other for support, and know that you're not going to have the right answers when you do it one time. You're going to do it multiple times, and year to year is always different. You're going to have different challenges. So it's really important to mention that, that you just give yourself that time, and understand that it's never going to be perfect, but every time you try, you're getting better at it.
Thanks, Yvonne, and thank you, Melissa. So we want to shift now to curriculum and instruction, which we know is a big challenge, and something that I know a lot of folks who are listening on have questions about. So we have Dr. Lisa Oslander. Lisa, many educators in New York City are serving newcomers for the first time, some of whom have interrupted or limited formal schooling. So what are some of the key resources that are available to educators for serving students with limited or interrupted formal education?
Thank you, Natasha. Sure. It's great to be here with everyone. And I'll start with just our team and what we offer, because sometimes I think people aren't aware. So I want to make sure people are aware of our resources. And we work, my team is at Bridges to Academic Success. We are a project out of CUNY. And we serve New York State educators through a partnership with NYSED. And so this includes things like curriculum, instructional resources, and professional learning, including coaching. We offer multiple programs for secondary schools who serve life and entering newcomers, and these include things like we have an English as a new language curriculum, an ELA curriculum, a math curriculum now that's relatively new and piloted, and a home language arts curriculum in Spanish. And these programs serve secondary students up to 6th grade or below in home language literacy. Yet some of our materials are appropriate for upper elementary. We do have some teachers who are using them in elementary schools and the upper elementary levels. But Yvonne mentioned the MLS, and I think it is important to note that that multilingual SIFE screener, we rely on that a lot because it's a wonderful tool to give us information. It's an intake screener from a partner project of ours at CUNY. And in New York State, it's available in 16 languages in reading comprehension and math. Which is so wonderful. I wish I'd had this as a teacher, and a lot of times people just aren't aware of it. It is helpful because it can provide really key information about our students, about their home language literacy that they already bring, and that we can leverage in our classrooms and in our schools, and not only leverage in instruction, but also in programming decisions. So that's sort of, those are a couple of the things I wanted to mention. But in terms of our goals, and thinking about the resources, we really try to support educators, including administrators, in implementing programs, and our programs specifically in their specific school context, so that their newcomers have the opportunity to thrive in their school context and in their community. So we really try to look at the whole school environment and see where we can fit in with the schools. That's a really important thing I wanted to mention. I think what makes our resources a little bit unique is that we try to conduct program evaluation and research on all of our programs through our university affiliation, and we use that feedback and the voices of both educators and students to inform our evaluation process. And then, so Yvonne and her students were a big part of that in the beginning, and at her school, for example, at ICHS, and we have many schools around the city and around the state who have provided really amazing feedback. We do focus groups with students. We really try to learn what's working, and it's been really a privilege to learn from schools and with schools in this process. And I think that's a really important part of how we create our resources. So I think for schools where curricular resources are not needed, we offer a national CUNY CTLE online course that focuses on strategies. And this course is designed specifically for co-teacher teams. And we found often that content area teachers specifically need that additional support because they haven't had training in language development, or maybe they don't have as much experience in working with SLIFE and newcomers. And we really want to help support them teach more equitably and learn how to be more equitable in the classroom and see what that can look like. So, you know, in terms of our resources, we have been serving in New York State about 130 districts, and we will continue to provide our materials. We continue to refer people to the RBurns across the state, and district leaders who provide a lot of support. We try to also share. So if you're in touch with our team, we do try to share a lot across districts and best practices, simply because there's so many things that people are doing, both with our resources and others. And so when we meet people in districts, we try to share practices and connect people. That's a big part of our work as well. So that's a little bit about the resources we offer and a few others.
So those are a great list of resources. I'm sure folks are very glad to hear about those. And can you now share a little bit more how you work with teachers who are serving this population? What has helped them to better serve these newcomer students?
I mean, first I'll say, like, in our role, the teachers have given us a lot of feedback that job embedded coaching has been really important for them in terms of thinking through, being able to bring problems of practice about their students, about their instruction, about how they're using our materials, and get support, have sort of a go-to person. And I think that's really important, that as teachers are learning new materials or working with, as many have said, a very heterogeneous population, with many assets and things to learn, it's important to help provide support. So that's one thing we try to do. We've gotten feedback that it's helpful to have a coach and an expert with whom to brainstorm, right? Many students from our classes have said that they feel they're appreciated in the Bridges class and are more confident as a result of the program, but also their teacher. So we know the teacher is a major player, makes a huge impact. One example that we found success with is math autobiographies. This is just an example from our math program. And these help students reflect on their experiences in math in their home language. And this is done, you know, we support the teachers in creating a safe setting. Many are already really good at doing that, but also as a way for the students to learn to reflect on their growth, say in a safe setting over the school year. That's one example. Many administrators appreciate having someone to help them implement programs that can serve their students more effectively, address their language needs, and help students feel more visible and welcomed into the school community. I feel like the internationals do an amazing job and always continue to learn from the work the internationals do, but there are many schools doing really great work. And some administrators through consultation have been able to leverage examples from other schools to create new structures. So these include things like dedicating a classroom to newcomers, or a Bridges classroom in our case with our work, structuring a family welcome program. Other examples include creating school-based learning opportunities for teachers new to SLIFE and newcomers to learn about the students and grow from the learning. We've also helped some schools adjust schedules to promote school attendance, because as I think someone mentioned, a lot of our students have jobs and other responsibilities. So every school has a different context, and so we work to help the school to adapt the programs that we offer. But I think one thing I just want to highlight, since I think it sort of integrates with what other people have said, is that we always try to start with the learner in mind. I think that's a really important part of what I'm hearing, and also in our work, we try to do this as well. We offer examples of learners we've served, what we can learn from them, about them. We actively build that into professional learning, an assets-based mindset to support educators in sort of thinking and learning about their students, so that they can leverage more, they can leverage that in the instruction. I feel like Yvonne already gave the examples, and so did Melissa. So, you know, I think the other thing that we do within our resources is we have scaffolds and activities that are based on the learner that are built into the materials to make it easier for teachers to learn about their students. So things like learner portraits from different home countries and language backgrounds. We really try to emphasize helping teachers look at the whole child, right? And then help teachers reflect more deeply on the students who are in front of them at that time. So there's more I could say, but it's a lot.
It is a lot, but it's incredibly helpful. You know, I think we're getting lots of questions about this. Like, what is one thing you would add and want to share and highlight for folks who are listening?
I would love to highlight portfolio. I mean, in terms of the work we're doing, where we're seeing a lot of the success, and I think some schools already integrate this into their practice, but we really try with our resources and with our schools to build portfolios. And some schools have this as a practice. This is becoming more common across the state, but we, particularly for our SLIFE and newcomer students, you know, this has been extremely helpful, because sometimes the larger state assessments or the global assessments don't necessarily capture that granular growth. And with portfolios, students can reflect on their own learning, have a part in that learning, see their own growth, and be a participant in a different way. So we really try to encourage student portfolio use. The other thing we love about portfolios is they can be shared with teachers who work with students in the future, so that their achievements aren't lost, you know, when they move on to additional grades throughout the school, and so that other teachers can learn. And so I think that's just an example of one thing I think that has been really helpful for teachers. We also try to create, I think intervisitation is so helpful. It always was helpful for me as a teacher, just to be seeing other people doing this practices that really support our newcomer and SLIFE learners, and the different strategies in action. Curriculum is certainly one part of the puzzle that we try to support, but also the instruction and other school supports are key. I just feel like we're all learners, and this process is about constantly learning from each other and from our schools. And at Bridges, that's something we really value as well.
Great. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing all of that very helpful information and those resources. I think people will find that incredibly useful. People are asking for links and everything. So we are going to be sharing, again, the recording as well as links in a follow-up email to everybody. So thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you.
And so we now have the chat function working, so you are able to chat to all the panelists. And if you want to share your name, your role, and where you are tuning in from, we'll be compiling and getting a better sense of who is joining with us. So let's now shift to, we heard about the perspectives from schools, curriculum. Let's talk about the community-based organizations. And so for that perspective, we have Maria. Maria, can you tell us a little bit more about how you're working with school leaders and educators like Melissa and Yvonne?
Yes, hi, good afternoon. My name is Maria Rocha, and I'm the program specialist here at InsideSchools. And InsideSchools is an immigrant-led nonprofit organization that provides support through professional development, immigrant-centered workshops, and ensuring schools are implementing immigrant-friendly policies. One of our programming efforts through our partnerships with New York City schools is to ensure schools are providing and creating safe and welcoming spaces for our newcomers, immigrant students, regardless of their immigration status, where we collaborate with the school team, and they select a specific focus area that they want to work on for that specific school year. So some of the focus areas that they can choose are educator preparedness, administrative action, parent engagement, and student engagement as well. So through these partnerships, our goal is to ensure that school spaces are safe and welcoming, and our youth is able to reach to their fullest potential. Other programming efforts that we offer at InsideSchools are direct workshops for students and families through community involvement and tabling events at community events where we are able to distribute resources to our communities.
Great, thank you for sharing that. So can you also talk a little bit about how schools can better elevate the strengths of new immigrants and their communities?
So our ultimate goal as an organization is to elevate and equip the ecosystem of a school, and not just relying on 1 or 2 to staff or 2 to 5 staff members to disperse this information, but ensuring that all school staff is well versed around foundational knowledge when it comes to immigrant students. And ensuring administrators and educators are well equipped with key policies to include local and federal policies such as prior veto, as well as providing information around post-secondary access. Oftentimes I myself grew up undocumented and here in the US and thought that college wasn't for me. But knowing that there is post-secondary access and opportunities for students regardless of their information also needs to be shared, as well as making sure that teachers are practicing culturally relevant teachings in their schools, as well as building strong relationships with their students.
And do you have any other advice to share? There's been a lot of questions, I think, on how people want to get engaged and support newcomer students. How do communities organize around these issues, and how can you better support a lot of the students who are coming in?
So as was mentioned before by my colleagues, it's important to leverage the experiences of our newcomers by including inclusive and culturally relevant practices to strengthen their inherent power, as we know that they come with a lot of cultural wealth, ensuring that they have access to resources that are also applicable to them, to include scholarships, internships, as well as access to interpretation and translation supports, as well as making sure that schools are creating opportunities for students to hold leadership positions so their voices can be included in any decision-making that schools are taking place, as we know that oftentimes these policies affect them and their families. So some of the schools that we've partnered with have created a student ambassador program that allows for this to happen, where students are at the front line of any decision-making that schools are taking in place.
Great, that's also very helpful to know. Do you find any you share a little bit about the different programs. What other support would you like to see to be able to support your organization to providing these services and these programs within schools as well?
We are seeing schools needing support around protocols around, for example, if ICE were to come to a school, what action steps should be taking if this were to happen, because we know that schools are a sensitive location, and making sure that any documentation is not being shared with anyone without a judicial warrant. So knowing that, making sure schools are aware of that, as well as having parents know their rights in and out of schools, regardless of their immigration status.
Yeah, that's all very critical information to support families. And, we at InsideSchools we've also been supporting families in terms of helping them know their rights with regard to education, living in temporary housing. So it's really critical to collaborate with schools, with families, and the community-based organizations. So thank you so much for sharing that perspective, Maria.
Thank you.
So we are going to actually have a little shift in our program. Assemblywoman Catalina Cruz is a little bit delayed. She's getting out of her previous meeting. So we're going to shift to Alejandra to give us a little bit of perspective from the national policy focus. So Alejandra, thank you for joining us. So, when Push Center's response to the arrival of newcomers in New York City schools, Mayor Adams has often redirected attention toward the Biden administration, the federal government. So what is the federal government's role here? And what can the U.S. Department of Education do to support New York City schools right now?
Thanks for that question, Natasha. I think this is really important and very timely. Unfortunately, the levers of the federal government are limited with regard to education, and that's by design. Education law leaves significant discretion to local authorities to make decisions about curriculum and program design and other education issues that respond to local needs. However, the ways the federal government can influence education policy are through funding, guidance, accountability, and civil rights. And when Assemblywoman Catalina Cruz is here, she can speak to more of the local and state roles. But here are some of the ways that the federal government can support, again, through funding, guidance, accountability, and civil rights. So the U.S. Education Department has the ability to dedicate funding, either through one of its title programs or through discretionary grants to districts that support newcomers. Adequate funding is essential to providing a quality educational experience and providing the wraparound services for students that need them. At this moment, there's only one federal government funding source that provides districts with funding explicitly for immigrant students. That source, which is within Title III, the immigrant student subgrants, requires a significant increase in enrollment of immigrant youth. This might be true in New York City in the last 2 years. We've talked about the increase of 30,000 students to our school district. But that fails, this system that requires an increase fails to provide enough funding quickly for schools and districts, even when they have that increase, to develop that programming in a timely manner when students enroll throughout the year. Further, that system also fails to provide districts with sustainable and consistent funding. You can imagine that you have an increase one year and the next year you don't have an increase. It's the same amount of money that comes from the federal government, and it's not responsive to what the district needs continually. So that funding would be pooled if it wasn't a continued increase. And that's unsustainable for programming. Especially in those first few years in U.S. schools, when language development and social adjustment, physical and emotional stability are super critical, as many of my colleagues have said so far in this panel. So ultimately, this funding system can and should be redesigned. Many advocates are working on that. And I believe we can do that by providing funding per newcomer student, so that districts can get what they need to provide all the services that each student needs. And there can also be, to address the timeliness, a separate funding system that provides flexible funding that can be accessed throughout the year when there are sudden increases later of enrollments later in the school year. and which can be delivered in a timely manner. We have funding systems through the education departments that do that, but at this moment, that is not how they work, and that is one of the challenges that we're facing in New York City, as well as in other districts across the country that are experiencing, that are seeing increases in enrollment of newcomer students. Another tool that the Federal Education Department has at its disposal is its use of guidance and Dear Colleague letters. The Office of English Language Acquisition creates tools for supporting multilingual learners and newcomers, and they also connect with state education agencies and districts that do this really well to collect those best practices. So in the past, because the Education Department has this huge platform, they've used that platform to elevate best practices and resources, guidance and tools for educators and district leaders across the country to implement when they are struggling, and struggling to provide all the resources that they need. Education Department can and should be doing that. They should be naming newcomers and immigrants explicitly in that guidance, not just the language needs, but all the wraparound needs. And they can and should be doing that even more explicitly at this moment. They can also serve as the bully pulpit and call out bad actors where districts and schools are known to be depriving new immigrant students of their educational rights. And that is another really important role that the Education Department plays. They are in charge of upholding those civil rights through the Office of Civil Rights. The Education Office of Civil Rights responds to complaints against the civil rights of students of all kinds of complaints. And they can work with districts to improve programming aligned with education law. Right now, the Office for Civil Rights is not extremely well funded, so they often fall behind on these complaints. With more funding, the OCR, the Office for Civil Rights, can hire adequate staff to uphold these rights everywhere that they're being denied. And that is, again, another big role that the federal government plays. And while the federal government's role in education policy, again, the mayor has often turned the attention away from the city toward the federal government. Those are the only big roles that the federal government can play in education, that their role is somewhat limited in education. However, the federal government does play a significant role in immigration and housing, as we know very well. It is the government's responsibility to uphold the right to asylum, to provide work authorization for immigrants, to provide pathways to citizenship so that immigrants can engage fully in American life when they arrive. It is also the government's responsibility to support local leaders with providing adequate housing, especially affordable housing. And so the role is much bigger outside of the Education Department. And we know that our students don't exist in silos, that every part of their academic experience is impacted by housing and access to healthcare and all of these wraparound needs. And the federal government can and should step up to support in those ways, the city, New York City, as well as in other places. And finally, I'll just say that there are many people who are working on this, not just in the New York context. Many of the New York leaders are here in this space, either as panelists or attendees, but there are folks across the country who are also focusing on this as a national level. And we do so through the National Newcomer Network as one of the spaces where we bring educators, advocates, district leaders, and researchers and community leaders to change policy at the federal and state level to enact systemic change for newcomer students. That information should be in the chat shortly.
Thank you for highlighting that. That was a lot of great, thorough information. So, again, folks have questions in the chat. We will have some time at the end to put it into the Q&A, and we'll be answering those at the end. I think Assemblywoman Cruz is trying to call in. I don't think she's on yet. If she is, just we're trying to get her on. But let's go ahead and shift to our student perspective. We've heard, from teachers, we've heard from principals, different community-based organizations. But now let's hear from a student. So we have Actas, who is a junior in high school, New York City Public Schools right now. Actas, thank you so much for joining us. I know you have a busy extracurricular schedule, but we'd love to hear about your experience in school, as well as that of your younger siblings, right? You have several younger siblings who also attend New York City public schools. Can you share a little bit with us where you and your siblings go to school and how your experiences have been adjusting to schools here in New York?
Hello to everybody. I'm Agnes and I'm a junior in Eleanor Roosevelt High School. I have been living in United States for almost 8 months. And first, when I came here in New York City, it was the time when schools had their school off. It was a summer, and at that time I could not join to the high school, but I went to a GED program for having a summer program, which I found it very useful to adjust myself into in a new system of learning in a different language, and also help myself to develop my English skills, and most importantly, to prepare myself for the junior school year. And it was very useful for me. I was very excited because it was a completely new start for me after 2 years of interruption. And the same way with my siblings, my younger siblings are in elementary and middle school, 5th and 6th grade. They're busy with learning English. The school experience has been great so far for me, and also I'm really happy that I have the opportunity and freedom to continue my education here in New York City.
Right. Thank you for sharing that and your perspective. So how do you think schools can do a better job serving immigrant students, considering your experiences yourself and that of your younger siblings?
First, when I came here, the first thing that I struggled with was the language, even though I know English, but still it's my second language. And like me, there are thousands of immigrants who come to the United States and they're facing problems because of the language barrier. So I believe that schools, community organizations, or policymakers, it would be good if they can provide some other classes or some opportunities to help them develop their English, and also to recompense for their lost education. Because many of the immigrants who come here in the United States, not only they have the language problem, but also many of them had interruption in their schooling, which can badly affect their abilities, the educational abilities. So if they can provide some extra classes beside the regular classes, like English class and other classes, so it would be helpful for them to educationally develop. And in terms of community organizations, I believe that it has a big role on students who are immigrants, the same way that schools has. Because first, for example, when I came here, I was really excited to go to school, but I didn't know where to start from or how to do that. And there was a community organization called Project Russo helped me with that and guided me. So, and I'm sure that not even half of the immigrants can access such opportunities. So it would be better if the community services can be provided for them.
We are also big fans of Project Rousseau. And so, we heard from perspectives from InsideSchools, and you're sharing a little bit more about the importance of community-based organizations to support our newcomer students as well. So thank you for sharing that perspective, Agnes. What is one thing you want everybody to know about whether it's your experiences, going to school here in New York City? What is one thing you want everyone to know?
The one thing that I want to everybody know that many immigrants who come here, they came here for a bright future. So there must be someone who can stand with them and take their hands to go to their goals. Because as a new immigrant whom I came here, the first thing I felt that I faced the language problem. So my siblings who are younger than me, they even don't know English. And likewise, they need lots of support. And I believe that what the immigrants need is just the support.
We completely agree with you in terms of the amount of support that we need to provide for our immigrant students. So thank you for sharing that perspective. And we're so proud of you and thankful that you were able to share this. So I know some folks might have some questions for you. So we're going to, again, have about 15-20 minutes at the end for questions. So thank you, Agnes, for sharing that perspective. So now we have Assemblywoman Catalina Cruz, who is calling in because she's at a very busy schedule, but we're thankful that she's been able to join us.
I'm actually, I don't know if you're able to promote me. I'm actually now in a place where I could be on video. So I can't figure out how to do this. If you're able to put me on.
I'm also trying to figure that out. We can hear you, so that's.
Let me disconnect and reconnect really quickly, see if that helps.
Okay.
Because now I'm finally in a place where I can do that. Hold on.
Perfect. Thank you. So we know everybody's super busy right now as well. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A. We'll start shifting through them because Assemblywoman Cruz is our last speaker of the evening. And so once she finishes, we're just going to open up to questions. So if you got questions for any of the speakers or for all of the speakers, feel free to type it in and we can add that and go over and answer some questions. I mean, I think we've heard some great perspectives tonight from the schools, from community-based organizations, the policy, federal perspective, as well as a student perspective. So it'll be very great to also hear from the state and local policy perspective. So I think Assemblywoman Cruz is now on. Here she is.
It says unable to start video because the host has stopped it.
Oh no, that's because you should be able to do that right now. And
there we go.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you for working with my schedule today. It was a little bit hectic. I think the perspective that I bring is to say we are completely unprepared for what we're facing as government. And we are absolutely failing our teachers, our administration, our parents, our new immigrants, because we are much more interested in pointing the finger at each other as government and saying, that's that person's role, that's that person's role, that's that person's role, then taking really account as to what we're doing and how we need to do things to provide our new New Yorkers with the tools that they need to be embedded into our city. As a way of background for folks who may not be familiar with me, I grew up as an undocumented immigrant. I was that newcomer 30 some odd years ago, came here at 9 years old when the prior student, when she was talking about the need to have resources that teach our kids English. I was a product of that. I was in bilingual education for 2 years and then thrown right into English classes with extra resources. And when I went to high school, I went to a high school that offered double English classes every year so that I could perfect my speech and I could perfect my writing. And we no longer emphasize putting the resources into that piece of our education system. That's one. Our lack of let me mute this because I don't know how to do it. And there we go. No, now it's muted. I have a new computer. It's not so much new. It's about 3 months old. I still can't figure out how to work it. And so we as a state are failing to do that. I will say one of the things that I often tell people is that while crises are year-long, we as legislators only legislate half of the year. So while we had a migrant crisis that began in January and is still ongoing, half of this year, we were not even in Albany. So even if we wanted to put money into the issues, even if we wanted to change regulations, legislation, we couldn't do it because we were not up there to do so. We're going back in about 3 weeks, and I fully expect that we're going to be putting in legislation, regulations, and funding toward addressing some of these issues. When you think about the fact that we went from 90 days at a shelter to changing the regulations to 60 days to now telling families within 30 days, you better figure out how you're going to be living and where you're going to be living. And, I was reading a Chalkbeat article this last week that really basically said, well, it's going to be up to the teachers in each school to figure out where each of the students are going. And that is absolutely mind-blowing. We are changing an entire system. We are breaking a bond that many of these schools have now built with these children, because they're children, regardless of whether they're 16, 17, or 5 years old. They're all children under the care of our schools. And many of these teachers, it has taken them, because of the psychological problems that many of these kids come with from either their country of origin or the actual migration process. They've now built these relationships of trust, of love, of care. And now we're saying, well, you might have to move, and you, school, will figure it out. And the other piece that people need to think through, and it's something that I'd love to figure out how we can tackle, is the money that a lot of these schools get in order to serve these kids. It's going to change how they're getting it, because the money is tied to, and many of the folks here probably may know this, because many of you are, if not, or are in education, is the money's tied to the attendance rate and to the actual number of kids who are in school. So if you have a school that, say, in September of this year had 100 kids, I'm just making this number up because I'm a lawyer and we don't do numbers, had 100 kids. And come January, because of this new 30-day rule, now has, instead of 100, 150. Why? Because those kids who were in another shelter system are now going to be moving around and might be in this shelter system or moving into this neighborhood. And now you have more kids to serve, but you have the same amount of money.
You muted yourself.
Sorry. So now you have, sorry, I muted myself by mistake. So now you have a school that has more kids, but the count is different. And where's the money going to come from? Because it's not like we assess it in the middle of the year and say, well, your student enrollment rate changed. Let's get you more money. Let's get you more resources. Maybe we need to start thinking about that. Maybe we need to start thinking about reassessing in a country and in a state where migration is an everyday thing. Why are we not reassessing the needs of the schools several times a year to throw that money into the services that they're provided? And in another thing that I think it's very important for our schools to do is civic engagement with the parents. And I don't know that I want to put that responsibility onto the schools and onto the teachers, because they already have enough to do. But I think the schools are an entrance way for us to teach many of these new New Yorkers and their families, what does it mean to be a New Yorker? What are your rights? What are your responsibilities? What is allowed to happen? What is not? I say that in the context of, I represent Jackson Heights, Corona, and Elmhurst, which historically has been one of the poorest communities with the highest number of undocumented New Yorkers. So I've had a migrant crisis long before this became a word to use. What I haven't had, and having grown up in Colombia, is something that I saw all the time and that I see when I go back now, is the children selling candy on the trains. And we're not talking teenagers who are probably cutting school. We're talking 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds who should be in school at those times. But what people are failing to talk about when they put these stories on the news is that many of the countries where we come from, that's an everyday occurrence. So for many of these families, it's nothing new, nothing's changing, they're just doing it in a different country. So how do we, as a state, as legislators, as civic leaders, begin to engage these folks to say, and these new families to say, you are now a New Yorker, here's your rights, here's your responsibilities, here's how we're going to support you, and do it in a way that feels humane, that understands the differences in culture, and that also provides those entities that are going to be doing the education and the engagement with the resources, because we can't continue to throw responsibilities onto teachers and onto institutions and say, do it and figure out who's going to pay for it. And so my goal when I go back in January is to begin having a lot of these conversations. How do we change how state is responding and stop doing the what is it called? The Spider-Man finger pointing thing. I'm sure many of you have seen it. It's a little meme where it's like 5 Spider-Mans and they're all pointing fingers at each other, because that is what it feels like when you have conversations about the migrant crisis, about the new New Yorkers, and about who needs to do what to meet the needs of these kids and of these families. I consider myself a success story of what happens when parents, when kids are given the resources to be the best New Yorker that they can be. And I'm eternally grateful to my educators, to my social workers, and to all the people that along the way in my school system became involved with my education and with my hopes and my dreams to help me go from an undocumented kid to a lawyer, to a legislator who now can help make those changes. And so I'm here to say we have failed. I know it's many of us who are actively looking at how to do it better. I may not always agree with the mayor. More often than not, I don't agree with the mayor, but we have left him to do it all. And a lot of this, not his job or his role, and frankly, his administration was not prepared for this. I don't think any administration was prepared for what's coming our way. So now we have an opportunity to take 3 deep breaths, look at what we're doing, change the landscape and say, okay, we F this up, how do we fix it? And how do we do it better so that we are prepared for what's coming? One of the things I'll say is, if we were paying attention, we could have seen this coming. If we were truly paying attention. 7-10 years ago, we had the child migrant crisis. What did we think was going to happen? Things weren't changing back in Latin America and in other countries. They were just getting worse. So it was only a matter of time before we ended up here. And now we have the responsibility to you to provide the funding, the resources, and to listen. And so I'm looking forward to the Q&A because I want to listen. Ideas, I'm all ears. Criticisms, I'm all ears. We should be asking, how can we do better to give you what you need to be better educators, parents, neighbors, and New Yorkers. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very passionate response. And you bring up a good point, right? Because we're trying to promote that collaboration of, it's not just one sector's responsibility, it is all of ours responsibilities, from the schools to the city, to the state, to the federal government, to community organizations. We're all in this together to support our newest New Yorkers. So thank you for sharing that. So we are going to open up for questions, and I'm going to allow everyone to start speaking here. And I think our first question is going to be for Yvonne. And thank you all for waiting patiently, for those of you who typed in your questions from the very beginning. Yvonne, can you share about your end of the semester project presented to family members abroad through video conferencing? It sees the family as an asset.
Yes, absolutely. So in the Bridges curriculum, and in addition to what we're doing with the curriculum, it was really, really important also in terms of equity to be able to show students how to do personal finance. This is something that students or immigrants don't usually get taught in school. It's never been the case. I'm a first generation immigrant from Colombia as well, and I've never had any sort of lessons around financial literacy. And so I think this is part of the empowerment that we want to give students and families, is to let them know, this is how you do it. This is how you make a smart purchase. This is how you take the power back as a consumer. So that's a social action project that I've been doing for 3 years now. And one of the components is having the students present their work and what they've learned around financial literacy to a family member. Now, it can be a family member that lives with them, or it can be a family member that's abroad. It was important for me to be able to open that up to families who live abroad, because as families, they've sacrificed so much to bring their students to the United States. And it's something tangible that they can see. They can see that their students are learning. It's also communicating that to them, that they have assets that they can learn, that they are bringing stuff to the table, that they're able to teach not only their parents, but also the siblings who are coming up with them. And that's really, really empowering. We want to be able to have more of those experiences. And it sort of came out very organically, because I said, I don't know who my audience is going to be for my social action project. But I know that these students need to know financial literacy. They need to be aware. They need to have that power. They need to take it back. And even with what Catalina was saying in terms of like civic engagement, like if you give that information to families, they're going to feel empowered and they're going to do what's best for their children in the long run. They're going to be advocates for their students, for their kids. And so that's sort of like the reality of what we were dealing with in the past 3 years, that it was important to be able to do that. Now, not everyone is doing it. I felt that it was needed because of the social emotional needs that these students bring to the table when they have 1,000 things to worry about. Do I have food today? Do I have a coat to go to school? What is my mom going to do for work if, she doesn't have any paper, she's undocumented? They're bringing all that with them to school, and it's not an ideal place for them to learn when their minds are elsewhere and their preoccupations are elsewhere. So it's very empowering to be able to give them this information and having them learn it and have them think critically about how this really affects their lives. And now that, for them, it's very new that they're able to make big purchases once they have their foot in the door and they get a social security number and they do all these things and they go through their motions of what we expect as citizens in a capitalist economy. So it's really important for them to be able to verbalize that and talk to their families and say, this is how we're disrupting the system of immigrants being taken advantage of. So that was very powerful. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Yvonne. And yes, thank you for the question. So let's go to the next question for Melissa. Who at your school, for example, helps balance this outreach or sharing of information? Because families sometimes trust just 1 to 2 staff members with particularly private information, but it can't realistically be one person helping the outreach. Are you finding a way to balance it out with your staff and the current bigger influx of newcomers?
So that's a very important part of the work, right? Like, what's our communication strategy? What's our communication plan? Who are the folks that have very clear roles around that? And how do we do that in a way that maintains the trust with the students and their families? I can give you a concrete example. So this year, we had gone through a phase where we weren't able to staff a long-term parent coordinator. But this year we were able to finally get a full-time parent coordinator who's actually an alumni from our school and understands the experience of many of our students and understands our program from a very unique perspective. And then we also hired a new position that's like a community coordinator who is working collaboratively with the parent coordinator to gather those surveys, follow up, and send information to the parents. And so those 2 team members, also with assistance by other folks, create a schedule for all the different outreaches that are going to go out that are sort of to the whole community through different platforms. We have a digital platform that sends out text messages that are translated into all the languages that our students speak, their families speak. We invite them into the school. They can have one-on-one meetings. And the nature of some of the conversations is very private, right? If students and families need an attorney and it's a very pressing moment in their journey to get relief, we always create a space for there to be privacy for those conversations and try to, at least connect them with another staff member that they're already close to, like one of our guidance counselors or their teacher or advisor. So I think having 2 people that are sort of on the forefront of organizing the work, having the data and kind of following through, project managing it, helps them be more, intentional about bringing in other folks from the staff. But, I think centralizing the work has really helped us.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. So we have another question. We can have Maria start out answering this one, and maybe other folks want to chime in of, the specific, any other New York City organizations or programs that you would recommend for schools to connect with more, to learn about or to share with families. Maria, you could share a little bit more about InsideSchools, but are there also other organizations that folks need to know about?
that come to mind, I think of the NYIC was mentioned in the panel with their frequent key to the city resource fairs that they have throughout the 5 boroughs, as well as the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs and Catholic Charities is what comes to mind.
Great, yes. Anyone else have any other organizations to add that you've been working with? No other suggestions? I mean, I would say InsideSchools. We provide a lot of resources for immigrant students and newcomer students too. But if there's any others who you want to share, you know, we can add that to the chat. And we'll be sharing links to other organizations that we've mentioned and different programs that we've mentioned as well in the follow-up email. So let's go to, let's see, a question that I think is coming up, and we can also relate. So for those of you who have been working with the newest New Yorkers for longer, how do you address the very real prospect that families will receive removal orders and that some children will have to return to their home country? How do you have these conversations with students, both those who may have a pending removal and those seeing their friends being forced to leave and thinking, am I next?
Natasha, you know, if I may chime in on here, I think it's even worse when you think about the fact that, and this is more anecdotal, of out of every 100 people who are going to be applying for asylum, you're going to have a good 40% of them who actually don't qualify, but because of the backlog of all these cases, you're not going to figure that out for 5 years. And 5 years from now, we are going to have a big segment of our community, because by then they'll definitely be New York, no more longer New Yorkers, they'll be embedded New Yorkers. You know, folks who are going to have to make that very tough decision. You know, I don't know that there's a right answer to this. I don't know that we're prepared for this. It's something that we have to start thinking about. It's mental health services. Is the idea that for a long time we should have had not one, not two, but several mental health specialists, you know, social workers in every school prepared and ready to talk to families about trauma, because now they're facing it, but in 5 years from now as well. And so what we should be focusing on is how do we get you those resources, because you don't have them. And I don't think anybody's been prepared for the number of people that we're going to have those conversations with.
That's a very good point. Thank you for sharing that. Does anybody else want to chime in on this question?
I think,
I mean, I just, go ahead, Yvonne.
No, you go first.
I just want to say that, you know, sadly, a lot of us learned about this during the Trump administration, you know, and I mean, it's not a new experience, I think, for a lot of the educators in our schools in particular. And again, you know, I think you can't do it on your own. You have to think about, you know, each case is different. You have to try to get the legal services. You have to try to get, you know, what might be housing services, because sometimes it's the parents, like, you know, we talked about parents going, but sometimes the students want to stay then. And so, like, how are we supporting the students in staying if the parents are getting deported? So it really is, it is a community effort with, you know, again, the theme of this webinar, right? You need legal services, you need, you know, social workers often, you know, the educators to kind of come together and look at this on a case-by-case basis and figuring out how to best support.
And Natasha, I know that I realized from the comments that we have people from around the country, not just New York. One of the best things that we saw here in Queens that I think should be replicated more, and I know that there's a couple of states that have them, it's what are called immigrant welcome centers. Ideally, those should be placed in a safe place like a school. But in Queens, we have one out of Queensboro Hall, which is, you know, like those super local government. And as a new immigrant can go in there and get all the resources they need, legal services, mental health services, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, I think, I don't know that the responsibility of talking about what's about to happen if someone gets deported should fall on a teacher. I think it's a lot of burden to put on on a teacher. When I was a kid, I got one of those letters inviting me to leave the country. Well, my mother got it. And I don't know that I get why the person asked, how should we be preparing? But, it's going to be very difficult, because if that kid is removed, deported, or has to go back to their home country, the relationship with the teacher is inevitably going to be broken anyways. So I don't know that there is an answer, and I don't know that it's your responsibility to do that. And so I wouldn't put that burden on yourself.
I just quickly wanted to say thank you, Catalina, for also sharing the personal experience. And I agree that there's always so much on a teacher's plate. And those of us who have taught and been in the classroom, we know that there is a lot. And also, sometimes a teacher is the only person that is trusted to a student, right? We just never know. And if you're lucky enough to be that teacher who is trusted, you hope that you have the resources to provide that support. And schools, that support is not provided at this moment. And I think we're really grateful to have Maria in this room. And because the work that InsideSchools does is to try and partner with the school district to provide training for educators and administrators who support immigrant youth who are dealing with removal proceedings, or who are working with the immigration system at the same time that they're trying to learn in our classrooms. And that training is really critical. And so for those of us in the advocacy community, a lot of our work is around ensuring that training to support immigrant youth is a natural part of becoming an educator and becoming an administrator, because just as we know how to support all the wraparound needs of all of we're learning how to support as best we can within our capacity as educators to support our students' learning needs. We also are tasked sometimes with the responsibility to meet their emotional needs as a trusted person in their lives. And that should be a part of some of that training, the trauma responses. And so we're working on ensuring that there's funding for that, and that's incorporated into regular educator training. Because like Catalina said, there are immigrants everywhere. We will continue to have immigrants in all of our classrooms. And so whether you're in an international school, or you're in a regular public school, or you're in a private school, every teacher should have some sort of training to support their students.
Thank you. Yeah.
Also that it shouldn't fall onto teachers. But like to your point, Alejandra, that yes, a lot of times teachers are at the forefront of they're spending the most amount of time with students, and sometimes those connections are made. And so it's sort of I go back to, a few years ago when we were really trying to revamp literacy, teaching literacy skills, explicit literacy skills to students who really needed them as a foundation, so that they can learn a new language. A lot of these teachers were like, well, I'm not a literacy teacher, I'm a content major. So how do we have those conversations? What are the systems in place at the school? How many guidance counselors could have that training, that could lead PDs? And it's all about really, at this point, building capacity so that we can share and disperse this information as best as we can. And in the process of doing it, also learning ourselves how to best do it. Like I said, we're never going to have the right answers, and we're dealing with human beings that are going to have different needs at different times. But I don't think that it's also necessary to separate the two, that teachers can't really learn how to deal with these things, because it's coming fast. And the best thing that we can do is just prepare ourselves for what's to come.
Right. I think this is a great perspective. Oh, Melissa, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we acknowledge, right, that we all need to work together and build that capacity. But the teachers really are the first responders, as are other staff in the school. And that's not going to go away. And I think it would be really important, both the idea of having those immigrant welcome centers that would be in a school location or nearby. I think that just sends the message that everyone is welcome, and this is a place where you can learn about the wraparound services, which not every school can provide. Even in our school, we're trying to create a system for that, and it's a lot of hard work, and we'll never be able to meet all of the needs. We need the system to proactively show us other links. And I think, as teachers, school leaders, all of us, how do we help the first responders feel, I guess, trained enough or knows some protocols to just handle that initial conversation when a student reveals to you something very traumatic, which can include a situation such as like a deportation, proceeding letter that we dealt with a situation like this just actually like a week ago, and a family doesn't have a plan for what they're going to do. We're seeing more cases where like one of the family members has an ankle monitor, and so that just, so many questions come up. And so if you're the first person that was revealed to, how do we equip you just to know what they call is like this soft handoff? Okay, well, here's someone else actually on the team that can help you, but this is a safe space. Like, thank you for trusting me and telling me about this problem, and always reinforcing to the kids that we work as a team. Even if there's one staff member, it doesn't have to be necessarily a teacher that they might turn to first when there's a new issue, and like all the other issues that are, converging, all the housing crisis, all of the transitions with like employment, like childcare. There's so many issues, and sometimes we're not ready for those conversations. So I think, how can we work together to help everyone in the staff feel like they can address like when that initial problem is brought forward? That's a really great place to go next.
Natasha, unfortunately, I have to jump, but I wanted to thank you guys for having these conversations and beginning to really think through how to address the needs. I'm going to pop my email into the chat. If anybody has any and all ideas are welcome. I want to think through how New York can better meet the needs of our newest New Yorkers. And I'm not afraid to go against the grain. I recently introduced legislation that would let New York have our own work permits because the federal government wasn't doing its job. So I've been known to, to create a little ruckus here and there. So I'll put in my chat, I'll put my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out. Thank you for all the information you shared. And to Ms. Shanori, thank you for sharing your story about being a new immigrant. Very proud of you. And I'm sure your family is as well.
Thank you so much, Assembly Woman Cruz. And we will be sharing again contact information with everyone too. So we're going to just do two more questions. And this one for Lara, perhaps you can answer Alice's question about graduation requirements in New York.
Yeah, I mean, graduation requirements for newcomers are the same as all other high school students. I think students do have a chance for Regents exams. There are exams that are translated for some of the content areas. Of course, not the English Regents exam. They have to pass the same English Regents exam that students who were born here in the United States and were educated here. They only there's a waiver that allows them, if they came in 9th grade or after, they can apply with to pass with a 55. So there is a little bit of a waiver there for the English. And for the Regents exams, they are translated in 5 languages, I believe. And as we know, there are a lot more languages in our system. And so that becomes a challenge. So students are then, given some accommodations like extra time, and they're allowed to use bilingual glossaries as an accommodation, but that can be incredibly challenging in order to pass them with, when you've only been here a few years.
Thank you, Lara. So we wanted to close it out with Actes for answering our last question. Leave us on a positive note. Before we do that, I just do want to mention that because there are some questions about families who've been asked to leave the shelters. There is a children's march next Tuesday. We will share information. It's next Tuesday afternoon at City Hall to focus on our schools and to oppose the 60-day limit shelter rule. But we want to end this with Actes. So a question for you, Actes, if you could help us, what does the future of immigrant welcoming schools look like? What do you envision that?
I believe that the immigrants who come here will have a bright future because they came here for a bright future. And what they need is just, as I have mentioned before, is just the support. And just they need to thrive just to bring a big change in their lives.
Thank you, Cactus, for sharing that. And thank you to all of our speakers for sharing so much helpful, great information today. We hope you and the audience are able to bring some of these lessons learned and best practices back to your schools and your communities to support your newcomer students. We also want to thank the New School and the Lemon Endowment for providing us with this forum. And I'd also like to thank Lara and Alejandra for helping plan and collaborate on this event. Special thanks to Anisha Mukherjee and Paul Rousseau, our research assistants, for helping us navigate the chat and live tweeting the event. We will be sharing a recording of the event and all the links to these resources, contact information, so that we can help you better support newcomer students in your classroom and in your communities. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon, and have a great rest of your day.